We're going to talk about the context surrounding problem behavior and the functions of problem behavior. But the bulk of this afternoon is going to be about these top 10 strategies. And so basically, these are the strategies that we as teachers and therapists at DSRF have found to be the most effective for our students in helping them with their behavior. So just really quickly, I'm going to go over what positive behavior support is for those of you who don't know. It's a scientific values-based approach to the assessment and intervention associated with problem behavior. And PBS has lots of theoretical underpinnings. The main one that I want to point out is this first one, which is Principles of Applied Behavior Analysis, which we often, just use the acronym of ABA. And I think ABA has like a general, people associated as a therapy that's used for kids with autism. And that is true. It is a therapy approach that's used for actually kids with behavior issues of all kinds, not just for kids with autism. But it's actually a scientific discipline in and of itself. And so it actually has contributed the laws of behavior, and behavior actually is very lawful, believe it or not, that positive behavior support rests on, okay? So obviously, positive behavior support looks at, the whole context. We look at, ecological systems. We look at, we want there to be principles of normalization and inclusion and person-centered values. And like the name implies, it definitely focuses very much on taking a positive view of the child who's experiencing problem behavior and that child's team as well, so family members and school personnel members. And then the other piece of the positive thing is that the strategies encourage and reward positive behavior. And so that's very much what it focuses on. And PBS has been found to be effective in a really small amount of research for kids with Down syndrome in school settings, actually. So a little bit about the context of behavior. Here's how we're going to look at context. This is called a 4-term contingency. How many of you here, just a show of hands, are already somewhat familiar with this? Great, perfect. And if you're not, don't worry, I'm going to explain each of them briefly. But basically what this 4-term contingency means is that problem behavior's occurrence is contingent or dependent upon 3 other factors, which I'm going to explain now. So the first one are setting events, and we touched on these already this morning, okay? So these are things that set the stage for problem behavior to occur. They don't actually cause the problem behavior to occur, but they make it more likely. If they're hanging around, it's going to be more likely that kids will engage in problem behavior. The antecedent is now actually what directly causes the problem behavior. Okay, so this is what happens immediately before the problem behavior that triggers it. Okay, so that's another name that we call the antecedent. Does anybody have a guess as to a common trigger for problem behavior in kids with Down syndrome in a school setting? Yeah?
Transition from a playground, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
To just removing your jacket, taking off your shoes, and with all the other children.
Exactly. So a request to make a transition. Yeah, and we talked about that one this morning. So that's a very good example. Okay, so and then behavior itself, of course, is the next piece. And then we also want to look at what comes immediately after the behavior. And this is the consequence, okay? So what happens immediately after problem behavior? And we can actually use the consequence and the antecedent together to figure out the function of the child's behavior or the reason why they're engaging in it. And there are only 4 reasons why any of us engage in problem behavior. And yes, we all do engage in problem behavior. It's not just children with Down syndrome. So the 4 reasons are, 2 of them we talked about already this morning. Lots of kids will engage in problem behavior to get attention, right? Lots of kids will engage in problem behavior to get escape from something they don't want, okay? So this would be things like, even just a delay to a non-preferred activity. It can be a complete end to the activity where they actually take off out of the school and they completely get away from what they were doing, or it can just be a bit of a delay in the activity. Tangible is kind of a funny name because I think we think of that as something you hold on to, like an actual object, and it can be that, it can be an item, but it can also be they're engaging in problem behavior to get an activity that they want. Okay, so it could be either an item or an activity. And then automatic reinforcement is quite different from the other three functions, which need kind of another person to be involved, right? The child is engaging in problem behavior with another person to get what they need. This one is actually coming from inside their bodies. So there's something on the inside of the body that's telling them that, I need to wake up a little bit or I need to calm myself down. And so they'll engage in what we often refer to as self-stimulatory behaviors in order to get that automatic reinforcement. So let's just do a quick example. We have 8-year-old Ermengarde who has Down syndrome, and she's sitting at her desk. It's almost lunchtime, and she's completed her reading and writing tasks this morning. It's time now to start her math worksheet. Okay, so let's look at what sets Ermengarde up for some not good behavior. First of all, she has low math skills. Second of all, she did not eat breakfast, and it is almost lunchtime. That's not good. She also had a poor sleep last night. Remember, we talked about that one this morning. And she already did lots of work, right? Because she already did all the reading and writing. And so oftentimes, setting events fall into what we call behavioral history. So you really have to look at what the child has engaged in already that day or that afternoon to see how well they're set up to do more work. Okay, and then what happens is that her teacher makes a demand to start math. She says something like, time to do your math, Ermengarde. And then Ermengarde does any number of things. You can pick your favorites. She breaks her pencil. She crumples up her worksheet. She giggles. She puts her feet behind her head. Okay, and then the teacher then sends the child to the principal's office. Now, is that an effective, just as an aside, is that an effective consequence here? No. Okay, who wants to take a venture as to why not? Yeah, they've basically allowed her to escape. And remember that these are kids who basically are engaging in problem behavior to escape or get attention, right? And so now not only have we escaped from what we didn't want to do, but now we're going to go to the principal, and we love the principal, right? The principal is, even if the principal is giving me negative attention, that's kind of fun. I get away from my math. I get really great quality attention from the principal one-on-one. I mean, what's not to love about that? Okay, so just keep that in the back of your brain when you're tempted to pull out the timeout strategy. It is not always an effective consequence, especially if the child's behavior is escape motivated. Okay, so the other thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we apply strategies to each part of the context. So positive behavior support strategies should be applied to each of those 4 pieces in order to get the most effective plan. Of course, this is often individualized, but today we're just talking about strategies at each level that are helpful for most children with Down syndrome. And then often the other thing to keep in mind is that the strategies are often tailored to the primary function of the child's behavior. So in positive behavior support, the emphasis is very much on strategies that prevent the child's behavior from occurring in the first place. Okay, so why? Well, because actually behavioral health, and we can think of it as being healthy in a behavioral sense, works much the same way as physical health. So what are some of the things that we all do to ensure that we don't get sick and that we stay away from chronic illnesses? Shout some out. Washing hands. Sleeping well. Eating well, okay? So these are all things that we do to prevent us from getting sick, okay? So behavioral health works kind of the same way. Preventing problem behavior from occurring in the first place is more effective than either trying to respond to it once it's already happening. So think about the meltdown that may occur in the middle of the hallway of school, right? Nobody wants to have to deal with that. Or then trying to change ingrained patterns of behavior, right? When you think about when kids get older and they've now been engaging in some of these problematic things on the order of years, right? It gets a little more difficult then, for sure. So it's the same thing with preventing illness and disease, right? We definitely want to try and do things that will, some exercise, some lifestyle changes that will likely prevent, hopefully, heart disease, rather than trying to recover after a major heart attack, which can take years for some people, okay? But it doesn't mean that the preventative stuff isn't hard work, right? So it requires planning and commitment. So for example, are these things you do to prevent your health problems always easy to do? No. Do you always feel like eating the giant plate of vegetables instead of the giant plate of pasta? No, right? So are they guaranteed to work every time? Okay, so, but it's the same thing with behavior. It works exactly the same way. But be a planner, okay? Be the person who measures twice and cuts once, okay? It's easier than fixing stuff that's gone wrong. But the thing is, this is going to require a major shift in your mindset, okay? Because you're basically, what I'm asking you to do with positive behavior support strategies is provide intervention before you see anything go wrong, right? Which is really, really tough to do. You can't use them reactively. It has to be proactive. But we don't really think about behavior in that way. You know, you might have thought when you were coming to this talk this afternoon, you might have thought, oh, this is going to be so good. Like, Susan's finally going to tell me what to do when my kid is doing that super annoying thing, and I'm going to know what to do right afterwards. But it's actually more about front-end loading the strategies so that doesn't happen in the first place. Okay, so if you can make that shift to thinking proactively, successfully, and become fluent using these strategies, then you just don't have to deal with so many problems. So with that in mind, here are our top 10 strategies and a cake. So it must be time to really pay attention. Some of you may have peeked ahead at the PowerPoint slides, okay, and you may be thinking, but there's nothing new here. Like, I already use all of these strategies, okay? And you're probably right. You probably have likely heard of and or used many of the strategies in the list. But I challenge you that if you are still struggling with a particular student's behavior, I want you to go beyond, am I using the strategy? And think about some more deep evaluative questions. So am I using it accurately? We're going to go through the guidelines for each of them today. Am I using it enough? Am I using it with enough variety? These are kids who definitely, you got to change things up, right? They don't like to do things the same way every time. And am I using it with the right timing? So this was something I really learned from that parent training project I did, was that parents often would pull out things like praise for good behavior at exactly the wrong time. So the child would be doing well in a particular routine, and the parent is not praising the child, and then this behavior starts to go sideways. And as a very natural reaction to this, the parents tried to encourage the kid by saying things like, you're doing a really good job, right? But that's actually exactly the wrong timing, because now you've given them reinforcement for the problem behavior. They needed to say you're doing a really good job 5 minutes ago when they were actually doing a good job, okay? So I've given you sheets on your table that have, you'll see that it's kind of like a little self-evaluation tool. I think you could do it as we go along today, but I think that might be quite hard to do. I think what might be better is to take it back to your school or your home and use it for some self-observation and self-evaluation. If there are groups of you here today, then maybe what you could do, oh, thanks. Maybe what you could do is actually evaluate each other in a very friendly way, very friendly and supportive, please. So you could do it in teams. What I do think you can do today is what will stick out to you, hopefully, are 1 or 2 strategies that you think to yourself, I definitely need to do that one more, and I really want to focus on that going back into school next week. So you'll also see that on your table there's a little sheet of stickers. If you don't like the stickers that are on your particular table, you might be able to ask people around you if you could use theirs instead. So what I want you to do is if you say, oh man, you know, I really could use some, I could really try to offer my students more choices, and I'm going to really try to focus on that, then put a sticker on that one to remind you that that's going to be your focus. The last piece, and you'll see on the flip side of it, is do I have strategies at all 4 pieces of the context, right? So setting, event, antecedent, behavior, and consequence. You want to make sure that you cover all of those if you can. So with those things in mind and armed with this evaluation tool, here are our top 10 strategies. They're colored by the level of the context they address. So the red and orange ones are all prevention strategies. Okay, they're all things that get at setting events and antecedents. And so you can see actually that the only 2 consequence strategies here, the things that happen after behavior, are those 2 right at the end. So in terms of setting events, take time to build your relationship is the first one. And I feel like a lot of you are super eager and you just want to get right to work right away at the start of a day or a start of a school year, and you really want to accomplish things this year. You know, I just urge you to kind of reevaluate your mindset about that. I think it's really helpful for these kids to take time for you to build rapport with them and just play, get to know their specific interests really well, develop a relationship with this child built on mutual respect. Because if they view you as someone warm and kind and fun-loving, the benefits include better overall behavior for students and teachers, by the way. There's definitely both here. And for example, they might actually follow through when you ask them to do something. I mean, wouldn't that be great? It'd be pretty fantastic. You're also able to have higher expectations of the child, behaviorally and academically. And you know, these are, and again, individual variability, but these are kids for the most part and adults who like to please others. If they really like you, they're going to try to make you happy, right? They're going to try to do things that make you smile, right? So, and then the last thing is you'll probably both be less stressed, right, if your relationship is healthy. And don't forget to spend time to build rapport with parents too, for sure. So this slide this is Riley playing with Bella, and this is just here to remind you of the importance of rapport, both between you and the child as well as you and the family. And if you take time to build it with everybody, everything is just going to work more smoothly. So these ones, the Down syndrome specific setting event strategies, actually we covered a lot of these this morning. And so, you know, there's a lot of setting events, things that set the stage for kids with Down syndrome to not engage in a lot of, you know, great behavior. And this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the things are respiratory illness, excuse me, poor sleep or nutrition, sensory overload. And of course, these are things that fall much more into the parents' domain in terms of monitoring them and taking them to the doctor and taking care of them right away. But there is something you as educators can do. If you know that one of these setting events is at play, you need to, right up front at the start of the day, reduce expectations, provide more help and more breaks, even for things that typically the kiddies can do by themselves. Do review activities. Remember, these are kids who benefit from a lot of review anyway, so this is a good time maybe not to learn new things that day, but to cover things in more detail that you've already done, and to build in more rewards. Now, I'm going to tell you, you want to do these things up front at the start of the day. Why do you want to do it before problem behavior occurs? I heard something. Can you put your hand up so I know who's talking?
Well, you might see that you're rewarding behavior.
Exactly, okay? So obviously, these are all things that kind of make things easier, right? And so you definitely want to do these things up front, because otherwise the child learns that, oh, I just have to do these, you know, I have to behave badly, and then my teacher or my special education assistant makes things easier for me, right? And we don't want them to learn that pattern. Okay, so antecedent strategies. As I go through the strategies from here, you'll notice that most of them have a definition and a rationale and some guidelines and common pitfalls. And in the interest of time, given that most of you here are educators and therefore very well versed in instructional technology, I'm going to focus mainly on the rationale for each of these strategies. So you're really clear about why each is important, and you can explain that to other people too, right? You can explain it to parents or other people who are working with the child on their team. And then I'll just highlight some points with regard to the exact way to do each of them. But the information is all there, though, if you need it. And absolutely, again, my card is in there. I welcome emails and phone calls, so please don't be shy. So let's get to our preventative strategies that address the trigger for problem behavior. The first one, strategy number 3 here in our list of top 10, are effective requests. Okay, so these are common requests that we make of children that increase the likelihood of compliance and or cooperation. So there is actually a way to give instructions to your students that increase the chances that they'll comply with them, which is pretty great. So instructions, requests, demands, those are all kind of equal things here. Basically, you want your child to do something. So your student's ability, why do we want to use this? Your student's ability to comply with you is related to your ability to make effective requests. Okay, so the more effective the requests, the more likely they are to follow through. Notice I haven't said they're going to do it every time, because they are still children. Teachers make verbal demands of kids all the time, but are the requests effective? You know, same with parents, same with therapists. They're not always effective, for sure. Children need to know that there's meaning behind the words that you say to them, right? And I think sometimes when we use a lot of requests, those really lose a lot of their meaning. So we can change the way you deliver them and use them less frequently. And so just imagine, if you will, the sorts of things that may ensue in your classroom when these kinds of requests are given, right? So it's very common for requests of some kind to actually cause problem behavior, especially that last one, right? It's time to put the iPad away and do some math. So you might want to spend some time thinking about what requests make your student or students engage in problem behavior. So here's what we want to do to make requests more effective. The first one is definitely, you know, say the child's name, get on their level if you can. Not always, I mean, that's not always going to be possible, but if you can, and make eye contact with them. And again, just you need to fake it till you make it here. So even if you're not feeling confident, you want to try to have a firm, confident, upbeat tone of voice in an appropriate volume. Okay, so using statements and simple language is another thing we want to do. We definitely want to stay away from questions. Why do we want to stay away from questions? They might say no. And in fact, they probably will say no. Okay, so, and then making realistic requests that you know that the child can actually do independently. So not asking them to do something that they're actually not able to do. This we already covered this morning. Try to wait, you know, at least 10 seconds, if not up to 30, for your child to respond before you repeat or give another one. And then make sure you follow through with the request, even if it means helping the student. So these are things like, you want to say something like, put shoes on, or shoes on, not, can you put your shoes on, please? Right? It just gives them an opportunity to refuse. Or line up here, and that one you notice I've augmented with a point, right? Like right here. So then you've got that visual as well, which makes it even a little more powerful. Instead of, you know, it's time to line up now, or we're going to be late for the assembly, and Mr. Talks-A-Lot is going to be so mad at us, right? That's not going to be good. It's just way too much language for these little dudes and dudettes. Okay, so some common pitfalls for this one, making requests too often. Okay, so I'm going to urge all of you to go back and try to just decrease the amount of verbal requests you make of kids with Down syndrome. There's a few other things here. That question format is definitely, you know, one of the biggest ones to stay away from. And then the not following through once you've made the request. And here's where I was talking before about meaning behind the words, right? So some kids have learned the pattern that, you know, my teacher makes a request of me, and then they make another one, and then they make another one, and then they make another one, and then they might make a couple more, and then they mean it, right? So I don't actually have to pay attention to the first 3 or 4 that they give me, because I know that they'll say it with more meaning later on, right? So make sure you follow through and you're ready to do that. And then, of course, avoiding peppering your student with requests in rapid fire succession. Try to stay away from that. Okay, our next strategy is offering choices. So this basically, you know, again, not rocket science, involves presenting a student with 2 or more options of items or tasks or activities. And once they choose, the adult honors the choice. So this is in reference to not making verbal demands quite so often. One alternative that you can use is to offer the child a choice, right? So even if there's sort of something they need to do right now, like go sit in the circle or go sit at a desk, you can still offer up a choice even though they have to do that part of it. You can say, do you want to sit in the red chair or the blue chair? And some of you might think, oh, that might not work. And I would have thought that too, except it does work a lot of the time. It definitely gives them more buy-in, right, into the activities that you're asking them to do. The thing is, what happens is that when we start to feel stressed as adults working with these kids, we are less likely to pull out things like choices, and we're more likely to pepper them with more demands, right? So you gotta kind of monitor yourself in that way too. So the rationale here is quite extensive, but basically research has shown that kids with intellectual disabilities are much more cooperative when they're offered choices during task or activity. And at an early age, kids need to, and this is maybe especially true for kids with intellectual disabilities whose lives are kind of controlled a lot by adults a lot of the time, they need to have that opportunity to experience self-determination in their lives, okay? So that's basically the ability to make things happen in your life or to, you know, act as a causal agent in your life. So here are some types of choices, and you guys are gonna have an opportunity in just a second here to start thinking about what kinds of choices you might offer your kids. These are just, there's lots of different types of choices. Here are just a few, okay? So you can give them a choice of the task or activity. So do you want to work on reading or counting? Materials, so do you want to use a crayon or a marker? How much to do, how long to do it, so working for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or for some of the kids, maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes, right, before you get a break. Sequence, what do you want to do first? Put on your shoes or put on your coat? So this is one that I use a lot in speech therapy sessions. So I will often just put out an empty visual schedule for the session for the kids, and I'll have the board maker pictures or the photos of the things that I want them to do. But because it does not matter to me at all what order we do them in, I just let the kid pick the order. And then they feel like, oh, I told Susan what we were doing today. I did that. This is what we're going to do. What's that? Exactly. It's my choice. Exactly. I have constructed what my session is going to look like. Okay, so yeah, so you can get really fluent at doing this. Choices are actually really fun, and you guys are actually gonna practice right now. So what I'm gonna do is there's a spinner on the next slide, and we're gonna spin the wheel, and there's a bunch of school routines on this wheel, okay? And with the person next to you, grab a piece of, there's lots of blank paper on your table. I want you to think of as many choices as you can that you could possibly give during that routine, okay, in 1 minute. And maybe there's prizes for the people who get the most, okay? So let's see here. We're going to spin. You guys tell me when to stop, okay? Stop. Okay, circle time. Okay, so 1 minute starting right now. How many choices can you give a kid at circle time? Go. So, how many people here, how many teams came up with 5 different choices you could give? Okay, How many people came up with 10 choices you could give? Great, wow. How many people came up with more than 10? That's probably asking a lot, hey, for 1 minute. But the people who got 10, that's amazing. That's really good. So it's kind of fun, right? Like you can actually come up with tons of choices that you can give kids quite easily, actually. Okay, very good work, everybody. Okay, so choices can be offered verbally, visually, or by presenting the physical objects. So which one do we probably want to stay away from here? Verbal, exactly, very good. Okay, so you want to definitely choose the type of presentation that your student is more likely to understand. And I have these outstretched hands here because we often do have to give verbal choices just because we don't happen to have pictures or objects with us. But what you can do is augment it visually with outstretched hands. So I could say to Stephanie, Stephanie, do you want chocolate or asparagus? Oh, see, she's definitely wanting the chocolate, okay? And that was very clear. And so the problem with verbal is that a lot of times we know that these kids don't process it well, but also they tend to echo back the last thing you say. You probably have found that, right? Because they're really good imitators and memory constraints and all those kinds of things. So it really actually does make a difference if you can just do this and this. They will often be able to then hold this, I don't know why it works, but they can hold this first choice in memory a bit better. So, again, I mean, you guys, it's not rocket science. You can definitely figure out how to give choices. I think the only thing I want to point out here is to only give 2 or 3 at a time and to make sure you honor it immediately, okay? Because any kind of reward for good behavior, and making a choice is an example of good behavior. Any kind of reward, the more immediate it is, the more powerful of a reinforcer it is. Okay, so you definitely always want to be super quick. So common pitfalls, you want to stay away from threat type things. I'm sure none of you do this, but you know, the kind of, you can choose to do that work or you will have no lunch, right? Like that's, you know, not a great kind of choice. Using too much, go ahead and use it with your typically developing children at home though. I mean, I feel like that works for typically developing kids sometimes. Using too much language, making a choice for them in advance. I mean, this is not enhancing self-determination then, right? If you just make it for them, I know she's gonna pick that anyway. And then not offering too many choices. So you might think that more choices are better, but actually you can think of when you go to a restaurant and you're hungry and everything looks good, and how hard it is for you to make a choice amongst all the available options, right? So yeah, we definitely don't want to give too many. 2 to 3 is good. And then presenting a choice option that's not currently available. So, you know, if the kid really likes going to the park, that's great. But if there's a downpour outside, it's not like you're going to take them there right away. So our next one, which I'm going to go through quite quickly because Riley is going to be doing a whole presentation after this one on visuals. And even if you aren't attending, you will be able to access the slides. But we're just going to cover here visuals to support behavioral expectations. So basically, what we want to do is provide positive contingencies for kids. So if you do X, you get Y, okay? X is usually something less preferred, and Y is something more preferred. We want to use the language first then, and there are 2 kinds of positive contingency visuals that we're going to cover here. One being first then schedules, and one being just a simple sequence with a reward, which is just a step up from the first then. So we know that kids with Down syndrome attend, learn, and remember more effectively through the visual modality, right? You guys have heard that probably a few times already today. So whenever possible, we want to augment auditory information with visual material. The other thing that I really like about visuals is it really puts you firmly into that preventative mindset. okay? Because it really requires you to plan and be prepared for situations. So if you're having to use a visual to help kids, you know, with their behavior, then you've got to decide in advance, like, what kind of rewards am I going to offer him, what choices, what activities are we going to do, and it's going to be all very nicely laid out for you, and you're going to go in more prepared to those difficult learning situations. And then visual supports enhance predictability for your student over the course of a day or a task. So understanding of time concepts is actually quite impaired in people with Down syndrome, and that continues into adulthood, right? So they don't tend to have a great sense of time. And enhanced predictability is also important because it decreases the anxiety that a lot of us will feel when we don't know what's happening next, right? So if something's out of context for us, you know, things like weird medical tests or procedures we haven't had before, or coming to a workshop with people you don't know, or starting a PhD, right? You're going to start out those things very anxious because you don't know what's going to happen. Now, the thing with us is we can remember the next time, oh, I had that medical test before. It actually wasn't so bad. I'll get through it. It'll be fine. And your anxiety does this. But the thing is, the kids with Down syndrome may not, even if they are repeating the same activity and you think they've been doing it lots and lots and lots and they should know by now, sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes you might have taken them to a particular classroom, you know, 50 times, and you think, you know, that it's going to be, you know, they know what's going to happen in there by now. But actually, because of memory constraints, they might not, right? So that's another reason to use visuals. Here are just some examples of apps that we like. Of course, you can do the old-fashioned board maker picture way, but here are some great apps that we use at DSRF that are pretty great. I really like these ones because you can access your camera roll, so you can actually get pictures of the kids engaging in the activities, which of course, everybody likes to look at pictures of themselves, right? Especially kids with Down syndrome. So if we can show them pictures of themselves doing kind of fun things, then they're going to be more likely, that's going to up their motivation as well. This is the simple sequence with a reward. So you can see here, this is one I use in speech therapy. So it's basically just a step up from first then, and now I'm requiring the child, so this would be for maybe like a 6 or 7-year-old with Down syndrome, right? I'm now requiring them to do 4 activities before, and again, they choose the order there, and then they get to choose an activity of their own, something that they want to do at the end of the session. And the thing is, we actually already do these things for ourselves. So how many people in here really like making lists? Right, okay, so lists are actually pretty rewarding, and they serve as a memory aid. It's not really so different from this if you think about it, right? So it serves as, I love making lists. It definitely serves as a memory aid for me. It's also rewarding for me to cross things off, right? And sometimes when I finish everything on my list, I might actually give myself a little bit of a reward, right? So we all use these things to our advantage, but we have to set them up for the kids with Down syndrome. Here are just a couple of individualized examples. So you can basically, you know, here's like a grocery list for a little guy. These were from my parent training program. And you can see once he goes through all of the groceries, he gets actually a couple rewards. He gets to look at cars for 5 minutes in the car section, and he gets to go to the self-checkout. And then the other one was for a little girl who was learning to eat dinner by herself and not have her parents feed her. So we started with taking 3 bites by yourself, and then mom helps you and you get a reward. And then we built up, she was actually at 12 bites by herself the last time I saw her. So again, here's your guidelines on how to use visuals. The main thing here, it just basically shows you how to set up and use the positive contingency. The big thing to remember is that a positive contingency is a promise to your student, right? You have to deliver the reward. So, you know, you can imagine a situation where a child has picked that I'm going to do trampoline, right? And they do all their academic tasks, they eat all their healthy food at lunchtime, they come in beautifully from lunch without a fuss, and you can't find the trampoline, right? What is that going to do to that poor little monkey? They're going to be real unhappy, right? And also, you know, otherwise you're basically teaching the child that they can't trust you, right? So, you know, among other damaging consequences to your relationship, it also makes strategies that are based on contingencies like this fail, right? They won't work anymore because the child will learn that, you know, I don't actually get the reward, right? So we definitely want to deliver the reward at the end. So make sure the trampoline is ready. The next one is incorporating preferences into difficult activities. So this is basically embedding things that your student really likes in terms of preferred items, activities, or interactions into routines or tasks that are difficult or non-preferred. And you can guess that this strategy works best for escape-motivated behaviors, right? Because you're making a difficult thing more appealing and basically, you know, making it less likely that they're going to try to escape from the activity. That's what we're trying to do here. It's upfront, more entertaining. And it's definitely something that me and all of those lovely people back there rely on heavily at DSRF. I mean, I don't think we could do our jobs unless we had this, right? So, you know, kids with Down syndrome have lowered levels of intrinsic motivation. Making hard activities more appealing is going to up that motivation because they're going to see that it's more exciting for them. It also enhances learning, and that's not just true for kids with Down syndrome, it's actually true for everybody. So there are definitely, you know, there's lots of research that has shown that using humor in learning situations or fun in learning situations helps you to consolidate information, right? And I'm sure lots of you as teachers use this on a regular basis. So, you know, what if you came here today and we all had like no PowerPoint slides and we were, you know, maybe we didn't feed you and we basically just, maybe we gave you some dry crackers and water just to keep you alive while we held you hostage here for the, you know, but no, we didn't do that. We have videos and pictures and, you know, hopefully fun and, you know, and all those kinds of things, because otherwise you would all engage in adult problem behavior, right? What might you start doing? What's that? Walking out, exactly. You would try to escape. You would. We'd have to bolt the doors, okay? You might nap. That's another form of escape, right? So you might even start chucking things at me. Who knows? Okay, so basically having more fun equals a better teacher-child relationship, and it can just lighten the mood during otherwise tough tasks. So you also think about how kids with Down syndrome have increased empathy, right? They pick up on your mood, and that can be either your bad mood or your good mood, right? They're going to be much more likely to engage with you and the activity if you are lighthearted and fun. So we want to make something that your student doesn't prefer more appealing so that they won't want to escape from it. It's about making yucky things less aversive or more appealing, which is basically like, why do we do this to the broccoli, right? That's what that is. So this is exactly what we're talking about with this strategy. So what you want to do is you want to cover the math with cheese. That's what we're trying to do here. The easiest way to incorporate preferences is to just make your interactions more fun, okay? So you don't need particular items. There's actually no ahead of time preparation necessary. It doesn't cost money. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but these are just some ways of interacting that I have found to be helpful, right? So if you think about, you know, you're waiting outside the auditorium to be called in for an assembly, and this is typically a situation in which you know your student might try to bolt, right, and take off, or engage in some other not so great behavior. What if you just quietly take things out of your bag and pretend to eat them? Do you think, I mean, that would keep them entertained, right? Like, we got some smiles here, right? It's definitely entertaining. Or putting things on your head, right? It has to be you directed. You want to do this before problem behavior occurs, but it definitely helps a lot. And I get that it's not everybody's personality, but even if you can find like a couple of things, right, that will help keep your child entertained. And like, why do we have to play with Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head the right way all the time? Why can't we do this to Mrs. Potato Head, right? I mean, this is much more entertaining than the regular, the eyes go on top and the arms go on the sides, right? It's good. It definitely helps the kiddies stay into what you're doing for a bit longer. So again, just some quick guidelines. The big thing here is be willing to use the child's preferences even if they are not your preferences, and often they are not. Even if you can't take another repeat of that song, I urge you to repeat the song, okay? So it won't work to incorporate anything that's not specific and individualized to that student, your preferences, what you think they prefer. You really have to get to know them. This is where that rapport building comes in again. And you want to vary it, right? You have to have a variety of ways. You know, you can't always eat things. Sometimes you have to fake sneeze instead, okay? So just a few examples. So this example might be for a little dude who really likes playing the computer game Minecraft. If you add the Minecraft element to a non-preferred activity like a math worksheet, and you have the example on the right, it should make it a bit more appealing for him. He might do 10 questions instead of 8. We do a lot of cooking and baking at DSRF, which is something you can do with this little age here. This is little Neve, she's so cute. You can do it at that age, but you can also do it with, adults, right? Because who doesn't love to talk about food and its preparation and things we can do with it? There's so many possible concepts here. So, 3-word sentences, asking for things, counting, colors, sequencing, taking turns doing stuff. Pretty much any speech sound, fine motor skills. You just have to be creative. Find something you know the student enjoys and build in what you need to teach them. I know all of you in this room have this aptitude or you wouldn't have been drawn to teaching. I am betting everybody here is really creative. You could use these school supplies, or you don't have to buy the Paw Patrol school supplies. You could just show a little quick 2 minutes of a Paw Patrol video as you take a break from something. Okay, I just wanted to tell you really quickly, I had one mom in my parent training program who she was definitely a very creative person, like even in her job and that sort of thing. And she became absolutely brilliant at incorporating preferences for her kid. So the little girl really did not like brushing her teeth, as many of our students do not. And she basically turned their bathroom into a disco every night. So there was a disco ball, there was loud dance music, and I mean like that kind of dance music, and that she would dim the lights, and they would have a dance party, and that kid was brushing her teeth for a full minute with this dance party. Okay, so I mean, it was just, she said, it was such a simple thing. Like, I didn't know that would work, but it really does. It works really, really well for these kids. Our next one is safety signals, and safety signals are a bit of a weird name. They don't actually have to do anything with keeping kids safe. It's just kind of a reminder that something good is coming soon. So it's a message that tells the child that something difficult to tolerate will end soon, and maybe that there's something better coming up as well. Okay, so the rationale here, in a student's day at school, it's absolutely inevitable that there's going to be things that are difficult to tolerate and endure. Basically, what it's teaching the child is the ability to wait, right? And how to persist at a difficult task, which is something we talked about this morning, right? That can be really hard for kids with Down syndrome. So they're really important to the long-term success of students because they help build endurance for those non-preferred activities like reading and math. Not that they have to be non-preferred, but every student has things that they don't love doing, right? And this teaches them to wait through those. Because waiting is really hard work, much like this poor little pug who's having to wait for her cookie. It's very difficult. Okay, so basically, again, here are your guidelines. This is how you give a safety signal. Some examples of safety signals would be do one more question and then you're finished. Okay, so that would be for an escape-motivated behavior, right? I don't want to be doing this activity anymore. 1 more minute, and then Mrs. Goofy Lips will come back and work with you again. So the Mrs. Goofy Lips has gone to help another student on the other side of the classroom, and that kid really likes Mrs. Goofy Lips. Okay, so you're teaching her, 1 more minute, and then I'm going to come back. So that's an attention-motivated thing. Put away 2 more toys, and then all done, because of course cleaning up is never really preferable. And then eat 3 more bites of chicken. So this is getting the kid to, do, again, something maybe they don't like that much, and then you can go play outside. Again, we definitely want to keep your promise. So that's basically what that last little bit is about. So asking that, what we don't want to do is ask the child or the adult to do 1 more after they've finished the original 1 more. And I'm actually tempted to do that all the time in speech therapy, because the child will be producing a sound and it's kind of passable. Maybe it's an L sound and it sounds kind of like an L and it's kind of okay, but it's not really that great. And then I can sense that they're getting a bit done with the activity. So I say, okay, just 1 more L word and then we're all done. And that last L is glorious. It is like the most perfect L you could possibly imagine. And so as a speech therapist, I want to keep going. I want them to keep making that exact sound, right? It's a good place to start from. But I don't want to damage my relationship with the child. And so I choose to end the activity at that point, right? We want to definitely make these, meaningful. The other thing to stay away from here is to not use a non-specific safety signal. So I think we all tend to say things like, oh, almost there, or almost done, right? But that's not really telling them exactly how many more they have to do or what's happening next. That's really good. And we definitely want to convey those things. So we can also teach students with Down syndrome skills that replace problem behavior. I'm sure everybody in this room is masterful at this already. You teach math and reading and social skills so that these kids have more adaptive behavior to engage in the first place. So for that, I thank you very much. So we're just going to do 1 teaching strategy that's specific to communication, and this is functional communication training. And so basically, this is teaching the child to use communication to convey messages instead of engaging in problem behavior. So again, these are the functions of behavior. This is functional communication training. They've learned that the behavior gets them something, right? Or it gets them out of something that they don't want to be doing anymore. So we need to teach them a better way of doing it, to ask for these things that they want rather than engaging in problem behavior. And so we need to look at that function. So if a child is engaging in a tantrum to get out of reading, that's an I don't want it function. If they're hitting their educational assistant to get attention, that's a hey, look at me function. And then whining and crying to get the iPad, that's a tangible function, right? So that's I want it. So that's basically the basic messages that the child is trying to get across. So we want to teach a functional communication phrase that renders the problem behavior ineffective and or inefficient. So basically, the problem behavior now no longer works as well or as quickly as that message. Now, this only happens if the adult also no longer responds to the problem behavior, and we're going to be talking about that more with strategy number 10. So in one of the examples on this previous slide with the whining and crying to get the iPad, this really only works if we teach a child to say, I want iPad, and we give it to them. That's great. But if we still keep responding to the whining and crying to get the iPad, that's not going to teach them to use that phrase enough, right? So we don't want that problem behavior to work anymore. Now that they have that message and they're able to use it, we only want to give them the iPad when they use that communicative message. So the great thing about this strategy is that it's a permanent non-situation specific strategy. This one is actually not now about the educator setting up the environment in a perfect way so that the child behaves well all of the time. It doesn't depend on our skills as adults. This is now a permanent portable solution within the child with Down syndrome, right? Because they're able to use that phrase. It's a really great thing. So this is a competing pathways diagram, and here's our little Ermengarde again. Okay, so this is what we actually want. Okay, this is sort of the, wouldn't this be wonderful? Okay, we ask her to do math, and she, lo and behold, actually just does her math. That would be great. But in the meantime, it can take a while to get there. Math is hard. It's hard to learn those skills. So we need to give her something else that gets her a little bit of a delay in the activity. Okay, so I need a break, or let's make the activity a bit easier by asking for help, right? And then it still allows her to escape for a few minutes. Again, basically you want to make sure that this one you really do need the function of the child's behavior. And then what you basically want to do here is enlist your friendly school/neighborhood SLP to help you come up with a message that's going to serve that the child can actually say or produce with an augmentative communication device or sign, right, that they can basically use from then on in. And then you definitely want to teach this functional communication phrase, both when the child, in scenarios when they're likely to engage in problem behavior, because that's kind of the natural teaching opportunity. But if you can figure out other times during the day, and again, enlist the help of an SLP with this, when they're not engaging in problem behavior, that can be really good too, because then they get more opportunities to learn the skill. And in the beginning, you must honor the child's request or message immediately and every time. And again, that's that they're learning a new skill, right? So you have to kind of, even if they ask for 10 breaks, you got to give them 10 breaks. You can fade that eventually, but in the beginning, you want to strengthen the skill because it's new. Okay, so something really important coming up, and that is to watch out for this really common mistake, okay? So it's recess, and Mrs. Chatterson, Jane, and one of the peers are playing. Jane begins to fuss and whine and look at a favorite peer. She then kicks the peer. Mrs. Chatterson intervenes after she sees the kick and says, "Jane, use your words." Jane says, "Come play." Her peer approaches Jane, and they begin to play. The teacher says, "Great using your words, Jane." Okay, so my first question is, what is Jane's functional communication message? Sorry, what was it? Gesture. She did, that was her problem behavior, but what was her functional communication message that she ended up using? Come play, yeah. Okay, so that was her message. What is the error here? Yeah, she was engaging in problem behavior, and what happened right after the problem behavior? Right, okay, so what happened is that the teacher actually intervened right after she engaged in major problem behavior. Okay, so she's now been aggressive with a student, okay, so, which is not ideal. Okay, so we basically, what she needed to do instead is give that prompt much earlier on. So